Hello viewers and students, my name is Eugene and I'm currently a teacher for animation and graphic design courses here at a local university in Malaysia. This video is going to be about transparencies, specifically in Photoshop. Now if you've used any Adobe Adobe softwares, you will notice that this word transparencies or modes of transparencies is not just exclusive to Photoshop, it also appears in After Effects. All right, but let's just, and the uses are the same in both softwares. Now, where can you find it in Photoshop? Okay, and I'm going to use it in context of actually digital painting today, and I'm going to demonstrate to you how I painted these two rocket ships here using the idea or the tool of transparencies. Okay, now let's just switch off this word here, transparencies, and I will show you where you can find them first. Okay, where is this word transparencies, or rather we call them modes. All right, now the first one is here in layers. In your layer tabs, you will find that you will have normal and then dissolve and this whole series of other um, what we call modes or transparencies. Okay, and they are separated by these lines because um, what they are actually groups of transparencies that kind of have the same effect. Okay, so anyway, there's one here in this set called layers, and then again when you're doing painting, when you switch to a brush mode, what you will find that it also appears here, up here. Yeah, and this is specific to the brush. All right, so in this video, I'm going to show you the difference between the one here and also the one here in two different painting techniques. Okay, so I'm going to start from the very scratch, which is a scanned image of my own drawing. Okay, and how I'm going to clean this up. Now, usually I like to do some form of physical medium drawing because I find that the lines you get and also the texture you get from the lines is a lot more different than when you're using a Wacom tablet. And I do like to draw on physical mediums a lot, and I find that it really makes it a little bit more personalized. All right, so now I'm going to just, before I copy this, I've kind of selected this area here now. I'm going to create a new document first, and I'm going to just make this an A4 document at 200, okay, DPI, and I'm going to turn it 90 degrees around, so it's going to be a landscape, okay? Now, I'm going to copy this rocket ship, Control C, and paste it here, and I'm going to just turn it the other way around. All right, now I'm going to clean this up first because you notice that the paper which I scanned it from is not pure white, so I'm going to remove this out, the excess, and just leave the line work. All right, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to use this line work by using the transparency tools. So I'm going to use the magic wand. Okay, I'm going to select this outer area here, and I'm going to delete this excess. Immediately you see that the outer area is gone and the yellow just retains in there. Now I do not need so many pieces of flames. Actually, I drew this for an animated tutorial, but since we're just doing digital painting for this video, I'm going to remove let's say this two and keep the center one, and I'm going to cut and paste and bring this to the back. All right, so, and flatten this too, Control E to flatten both of them together, and I have got one rocket ship here. I don't want it to be this yellow tinge of paper, because I do not want it to influence the color I'm going to put in later on. So I'm going to just adjust the brightness and contrast. Where I went to is image, brightness and contrast, just simply bump up the contrast so that the white becomes more white, and just also increase the brightness a little bit more, and then you get kind of white that's almost similar to this pure white at the back. Press OK and you're done. All right, so I would name this, and because I'm gonna show you two different techniques, I'm gonna duplicate this, alternate, and duplicate, and I'm gonna flatten these two. Let's just kind of offset this a bit so it looks kind of visually nicer with the asymmetry. I'm going to name this layer line work. Done. And the first thing that we're going to see how we're going to use this modes or transparencies is by looking at the background. Let's look at the artwork I've done previously. This texture at the back, which is this kind of watercolor texture, I actually downloaded it. All right, so I'm going to go to File and open this watercolor texture here. From any website, you just type watercolor textures and make sure you download a royalty-free one. I'm going to copy and then paste into this piece of artwork. Control T to see how much of the artwork is left unseen. I'm going to just move it around to see which texture area of the texture I like the most. I think I didn't want to leave it here because I noticed there's a little white air, like kind of lighter areas here that lack texture. So I'm going to just move it to the center so that the texture is a little bit more even right now. And I think just about here is nice. All right. The reason why I wanted to use a watercolor texture here right now because I wanted it to have a kind of like an outer space feel, and I feel that the watercolor texture just gives that kind of feel where, you know, it has almost like this nebulas and gas, like debris in outer space and gases that are float suspended in space. So I wanted that kind of texture which this piece of watercolor gives. All right, now let's go back to the artwork. And so we have the watercolor texture here. I'm going to create a new layer right now. Yeah, and I'm going to make a gradient which is possibly, I think this color is okay, a lime green to a blue. Now you might find that it's a bit weird for me to use this color right now, but wait till you see how I use the transparencies and the kind of effect it has. So I have got one layer here, yeah, which is the watercolor layer, layer 1, and then I've got the gradient behind it, which is layer 2. Now for transparencies to work, you need two. You need two different layers because the idea is to make one of it a transparent layer. Transparent not in the sense that we make it disappear completely, but that it will see through and allow for the bottom image to kind of make the top image kind of see through into the bottom image. So it's almost like a chemical reaction or rather visual reaction between layer 1 and layer 2. All right, and it's pretty interesting, the kind of effect that you will get, but I will explain later on the logic behind these kind of groupings, especially the first two. For this one, now to create the space background, I'm going to go and choose something like overlay. Probably not, I think. Hard light. It's still too bright. Perhaps I'll be going to the first group and choose something like multiply or color burn. I think this is pretty interesting because it is dark enough for it to be a space kind of a background, and I wanted to retain the blue color of the top image of the watercolor image, because you see, if I were to make it something like a black and white, it would become very dirty, right? So I wanted to retain the blue. The blue of the watercolor actually will react with this behind. All right, so I would like to keep this, but I think it needs a little bit of painting the background. Yeah, so I'm going to change my brush mode to a textured brush like this, and I'm just going to touch it up with some dark blue so that there is an area of focus behind. So I'm going to just, oops, sorry, Okay, this is where again, I'm going to be using a transparency mode, but on the brush, yeah? So if I change it to multiply, right, and I choose this teal color and paint it right now onto this layer, you'll notice that it will darken. Though it is this teal, but when I paint it over the yellow, it will react with the yellow and create kind of a dark green color, all right? Yeah, so the effect is quite different. Now, how to know what to use? This top category here basically darkens the image, yeah, and this one lightens and this one affects the color, right? The best way to see how it's affecting, I think, is to switch it back on. Okay, so now when I switch the watercolor texture back on, you notice that, oh no, there is this area that has become too dark and it's not looking very nice because it's like it's overburnt. So I don't want that. I'm going to switch up this off and pick the yellow again and switch the watercolor back on and kind of go back and retouch it again, right? Because I don't want it too dark. Now, before I proceed to painting, probably it's good right now for me to explain a little bit more on what and where these terms come from, particularly the word burn and dodge. All right, so I prepared a slide here. All right, so where the origins of burn and dodge and burn come from? It is actually from photography. You all know that this is a film negative. I think in this generation of digital photography, despite most people not using film anymore, I think you might have still seen this before in films or in movies. So now what happens is when we are processing photographs, we have this film. Yeah, I used to do it when I was a student almost 20 years back. And we would snip out a piece of this film that we want and slide it into this photographic enlarger. And we will only do this in a dark room, which means that it's a room that has only this infrared light, which is safe enough and will not burn your photographic paper. So we slide the film into this machine, this photographic enlarger, which is actually just a contraption with a light bulb in here, that will shine a light through your film, and the film will be projected onto your photographic paper. The photographic paper is photosensitive, meaning areas that will touch light will get burned, whereas areas which does not get touched by light or is blocked out by a shadow will not get burned. All right, which is why you notice that your your film negatives are inverted. Yeah, so areas that are lighter, you'll notice is black. Okay, for example, like this image here, you will know that this black area behind this man, these two men, are essentially going to turn out white, right? It's because this film negative has so much black here that it will block out any light from the photographic enlarger to penetrate through to the photographic paper. So it will not burn the paper at all, right? That's why it's inverse, right? So what happens is it will get projected here, okay? And then you will, once it's burned after a few, probably there's a standard timing of like 15 to 20 seconds, then you take the paper, which you will not see the image yet. You don't see the image yet. It's still a white piece of paper until you start putting into the solution, and then the picture will start coming out. All right. Now, what this is a contact sheet. How do we decide on which photo we want? Is not through looking at just the negatives. We actually process them as a kind of like a sample first in smaller size. So we don't slide in all of these negatives into here. What we do is we stick them on a piece of glass, the whole entire roll of film, which last time we used to have like 36 pictures to take. And then we would put this piece of glass on a photographic paper and just let the light shine through and have the negatives processed onto the photographic paper directly. Okay, now where does the idea of color dodge or dodge and burn come from? Now, back then, before the era of Photoshop, when we take a picture and we notice certain areas are too dark or they are too light, for example, like this one, they would actually try and lighten certain areas like this building behind here, which the original one they thought is a bit too dark. And when there's too much dark areas around, this figure kind of loses its importance, right? So what they wanted to do is lighten everything and make him look a lot more contrasted against this light background. So in order to do that, they need to lighten all of this area. So as you can see here, they're scribbling the timing for all these kind of different areas to tell you how long this should be exposed to the light and all that, okay? So it's a pretty complicated process, but basically it involves blocking light and also allowing the light to burn the image more. All right, so if you block light from coming in, something dark will become a lot lighter. Something light will become a lot darker if you allow it to burn. All right, if you want to know more about this process, you can go to this YouTube link right here, which I will also post in the description below. Do check out how it's done. It's a pretty interesting process, and you will learn to appreciate how much easier it is for you to do Photoshop nowadays. Okay, it digitally rather than manually. But it was a really fun process because the results might come out pretty unexpected. Okay, so coming back to your drawing here, coming back to our Photoshop here, you notice that there is the same term, color burn, linear burn, color dodge, linear dodge. So anytime you use this group, it tends to lighten. For example, like if I took this watercolor texture and went to the lighten screen color dodge, you'll notice that things become a lot lighter and it lightens the entire image, or rather the texture behind. Yeah, see? All right, whereas the top one kind of darkens it, color burn. Yeah, so basically it's like taking the top texture and burning it onto the bottom. All right, okay, so right now I think that I've settled on multiply, which I think has a very nice sort of color. I'm going to darken it slightly some more and choose a this blue and go to multiply, lower the opacity of my brush, okay, just kind of paint the sides here. The reason I'm doing that is because I wanted some darker areas on the top and on the bottom so that the center two areas here would have a little bit more light. Then color dodge. Yeah, I probably have some pink coming in. You see, I chose pink, but because of the transparency I'm using for multiply on this blue watercolor image, it's coming out a lot different. And in addition, I'm also using a color dodge right now for the brush. If I change it to normal, you've noticed that more pink would come out, and it's giving this very nice effect. Yeah. So for me, using transparencies is still a lot of experimentation. You might want to do one stroke and see how it turns out. But generally, rule of thumb is these tend to darken and these tend to lighten. And there is always one of these modes that I use to create shadows, and one of these modes I create to use highlights. All right, now I've got these two spaceships here, which I will paint with very different styles or different techniques, but the outcome should be the same. All right, now this is line work. I'm going to click Control and select them and create a base layer where I would fill with a base color. All right, I'm going to fill them both with gray. All right, so I filled the back with gray, but I can't see the gray because this line work, as you remember, there's that white of my paper which I've brightened up. Now, how do you see through? This is again another time where I'm going to use transparencies, right? Now, every time you have a piece of line work that you've scanned in and you want to use the lines, you want to use the outlines, and you've got white in the center like this, but yet you want to paint the bottom, the best way to do it is to take your line work layer that you've cleaned up yeah, and brighten up so that the white area is really nice and white, you change this to multiply. What happens is, with multiply, the white becomes almost like it's disappeared, yeah, but the black line is retained. Okay, so I like to use it whenever I have line work. I like to change my line work to multiply, and always remember to lock your line work, because you don't want to be painting on your line work. You're going to paint on the base, this color base, this different layer that has all the colors in it. So you're going to call this the color base. All right, okay. So now, this rocket on the left, I'm going to use different layers to paint it, whereas this one on the right, I'm going to paint it all in one layer. All right, for this one, for both of them, I would just paint the same base layer first, okay? And for this part of the video, I'm going to just speed it up a little bit more so that you don't waste time watching me paint the different parts of the rocket, okay? Okay, so that was a quick paint of giving these two rockets the same base color. I just realized that I could have just painted one and duplicated the other one, but it's a simple design, enough design anyway. So it was done very quickly. So now, we're going to start with this rocket here on the left hand side. All right, now to do this, I'm going to paint. This first technique I'm going to show you is how I used to paint when I first started digital painting. And it's a good way to keep your shadows and your highlights in control, because you're going to paint them on separate layers. So I'm going to start painting the shadows first. Usually with all of my digital paintings, I do paint the shadows first to create form. All right, now I'm going to choose a hard brush right now to create the shadow, and I'm going to pick. Now when you're painting, obviously, I think if you've done some painting before, you'll notice that shadows aren't necessarily gray or black in color. They have color to them, and I'm going to use I color picked a blue from here because I wanted the shadow on this side of the spaceship to have a blue tinge. All right, so I'm going to just slow down the brush a little bit, and I've color picked this blue, but I feel that because I know that when I'm going to change this mode to multiply, um, it will darken a little bit more. So I'm going to use this light blue. Now, you might think that, oh, this is going to be weird. It's got a blue shadow, but let me just paint in this blue thing first, all right? And then, let me show you what happens when I change this transparency to multiply. See? Now that blue that you were painting previously, let's set it back to normal. This blue, once you've changed it to multiply, it reacts very differently, okay? It kind of has a tinge of that gray inside, and this one has a tinge of that red inside. So it reacts it reacts to the color of the base, all right? So now, after painting this, I realized, well, it's probably not a very good color. It's a bit too dark, so I'm just gonna delete it. Control A, delete. So I usually would like to paint with, if I know I'm going to paint this as shadow layer, I'm going to change this to multiply first anyway, so that I can see the effect immediately rather than paint the shadow and then look and then kind of get a shocking surprise to see what kind of effect comes out. So I'm going to paint it with a lighter gray now, and yeah, I think it's a lot better. In fact, you know what? I'm going to use a textured brush for this because I want it to have that gritty feel. Yeah, see? Alright. So when it reaches the gray, you don't see much of a difference. You might find that, oh, this gray on gray thing is not making much difference. But when it goes into this red area, you notice that it does have an effect. It has a bit of the blue that I'm painting with, but it's reacting to the red on the bottom, right? Because of this transparency mode, right? If I don't have this transparency mode, see what happens, right? It becomes that blue and it's not reacting to the red. Whereas if I change it to multiply, it does, right? Okay, so I know my light source is going to come from here. When you're painting, one very important thing is to know where your light source is. If not, you will have no idea where to paint your shadows. Always make sure that you know consciously or mark out where your light source is. In this case, you probably would want to just put an arrow to know, okay, this is your light source. This is where your bounce light is coming. So bounce light is a lot lesser, so therefore shadows will appear here. All right, so just continue painting. Yeah, this is probably like the window. It would have like an edge or embossing, so it would have a shadow. Underneath here as well would have a shadow. Down here might have a shadow, okay, but probably not too much because there's flames down here, so it would catch a bit of light as well. Over here might get some shadow, right? In fact, more on this side than on this side, okay, and over here as well, okay. A little bit more probably on the glass, because if the light is coming from here, the edge would cast a shadow onto the glass, so see it's reacting to the blue as well, okay. And I would probably create like an edge here, okay. All right, so we are done for the shadow part, okay. In fact, maybe if you want, you can add a little bit more texture just by probably picking a green color. It gives a different effect. Lower the opacity and click on this so that it reads your pen pressure. Now gives it a bit more texture and a little bit more variation in color. Makes it more interesting. Okay. Right. So I'm quite satisfied with the shadow of this spaceship. Now I'm going to go ahead and create the highlight. Now the highlight will be painted on a different layer because it will use a different transparency mode. All right, so I'm going to use highlight. And in this case, I'm going to pick yellow. All right, kind of a light yellow color. And use the same textured brush. Usually when I'm painting something, I would also use kind of the same texture brush so that the texture that is created is not too vastly different and that it looks more unified. So I'm going to paint the top one here first because I want it to have a glossy edge. Oh, sorry, I've not switched or changed the mode yet. I'm going to use this second category of what you call uh, transparency modes, and usually my favorite is actually the linear dodge, or the color dodge, which really is very good for painting metals. Um, it gives that kind of metallic sheen to it. All right, so you see the yellow is not going to be, if I change it to normal, it's going to be this light yellow color, right? But if I paint with color dodge, it reacts to the yellow on the bottom, the orange on the bottom as well. Okay, I'm going to paint a little bit here, probably lighten the yellow for this part and this portion, and perhaps somewhere on the glass as well. So it's like a yellow light shining on all these different parts, but it's reacting to the different colors of the base color differently. And then this side, and I'm going to create a division here where so that it has that, it catches, it's as if it has an edge here and it's catching light, and then here as well. Oh, and this bottom part is gonna be quite interesting. I'm not gonna use yellow. I'm gonna pick the flame color and paint it here. Right. Right. So I've got color dodge on, but I feel that yeah, this is good enough. All right. So this is with, we can probably add a little bit more here. Oops, sorry. Um, I'm gonna use the yellow again because I want to create this. Okay, so this is the first method that I used to paint when I first started. Sorry, let's just add in the flame as well, right? Because it should be hotter in the center, so we add a little bit of yellow there. Now, this is how I would paint when I was when I first came out from college and when I was still trying to master Photoshop. I have them all separated into different layers. It is a good technique, but I feel that at some point, I like to take all these three layers, the color base, the shadow, and the highlight, and flatten them, and then paint them as one layer. Now, which is what I'm going to do here. Now, you notice to create the shadow and the highlight, I actually separated them, and I'm functioning on three different layers. Whereas this one, how I'm going to show you is I'm going to paint them all in one layer, and I find that it's a little bit more, it's almost more intuitive, and it looks, the colors blend better. All right, so now I'm going to take textured brush again. I'm going to start off with a blue, kind of a blue color here. All right, and I'm not going to be but it still involves transparencies, but where not the ones in the layer, but rather the ones on the brush. So this one here, if you notice this set of why do you have one here and one here? It's not because of the convenience of, oh, if your cursor happens to be here, you can click here. If your cursor happens to be here, you can click here. No, they are separate. All right, this, if you change this now with color base selected, this base color is going to start reacting to the bottom layer. All right, so when you change it to, let's say, overlay, you notice that it starts, the texture on the bottom will start coming through. All right, so you've turned this into like a transparency. You know, the idea of transparencies is like, you know, those plastic film that you put on top of your report covers or your overhead projectors. Yeah, so it's the same thing. If you color it with a certain color, or you have a texture on it, or if you dots on it, and you put it through a light, that's what happens. You can see through it, right? So it's the same thing, okay? So let's set this color base back to normal, but we're going to change the brush mode now, all right? And because we're painting shadows, I usually like to use multiply. Increase the brush size. I'm going to be using this textured brush, and make sure you lock the alpha so that when you paint out of this, you won't be, it stops where the color base is, all right? It won't go out. So I'm going to just create shadow on one side of this ship, here and here and here. Same place I did it just now, and somewhere on the bottom here. And of course, where the window frame is. Okay, and here as well, also here too, right? Okay, and possibly here at the bottom. Sometimes it's nice to use just a hard brush to create those, yeah, so that it has these little knobs here have a cast shadow. Okay, I am quite happy with the result. Okay, all right, now, and I might add in this texture, a little bit of the green, which I did again just now. So yeah, so it has a bit of that watercolor texture, a bit too much maybe, but it's okay. And next I'm going to go and do the highlight. All right, the highlight again, I'm going to use the same kind of eyeball and try and get the same yellow. And you'll notice that it blends a lot nicer. And I'm going to choose, instead of multiply, I'm going to choose color dot join. I'm still working on the same layer. Yeah. Oops. Probably linear dodge might work better. Yeah. So yeah, you have to kind of play. A linear dodge has a stronger effect than color dodge, right? And you notice that the yellow is reacting with the red as well, especially in this area, and gives off like interesting colors start coming out, right? If you keep going over it, it will become even more metallic, all right? And I'm gonna do this again with the window. So you see the yellow of the coming from your brush is reacting with the blue of the surface and giving a very nice effect. And let's do the top part as well. So you see it gets a nice, you have this nice sheen, metallic sheen when you're using a brush because it keeps building on top of the brush strokes, which I like in when you paint on the same layer, which you cannot get if you're painting your highlight on a separate layer. In order to get this kind of overexposure, if you were painting your highlight on a separate layer, you might end up having to switch your brush to like a normal mode and paint white. Whereas this, you can gradually build and see the thing become shinier and shinier almost naturally, and that's what I like about painting on one layer. All right, I'm going to go to the side here. And oh, one thing I forgot to do for this ship is to also paint in the bounce light. All right, so I'm going to pick a green color, just create a bounce light which should occur on the side of this ship. Yeah, so you can see it has a very nice, interesting effect when I paint blue over this gray area. It doesn't just come out a normal, like the blue that I just picked, which is like a teal turquoise color. It has this interesting combination of colors that will come out. Oh, and one area that I have yet to paint is, of course, the highlight on this side of the ship. Yeah, I'm gonna try and do it with a nice, oops, sorry. I moved the texture. Go back to layer. With a nice big stroke. Right. Right. And of course, the ledge that I've made also on this side. Okay. And this side. Oh, and the flames as well. Now, you notice that with the flames, you can really see the difference if you're painting it on directly onto the same texture. Yeah, you get this overexposure, but this gradual change into the orange, which is very nice. All right. And even the flame, you will notice that when I paint the flame, it's a lot more different. Yeah, I have this intense white that I can create when I'm painting directly onto this layer. So yeah, you can see the difference. There is more contrast because of the capability of creating this overexposure white, but you don't want too much of it because overexposure is, or too much of overexposure is not really necessarily nice. So this contrast of shadow and light that you get with painting directly onto the color base is a lot more interesting, right? And this one here is where I've done it in 2 different layers. It's nicer if you get, it's good to, that's why I said at the beginning when I completed this one, I would eventually flatten all these 3 layers and then kind of touch it up a bit more. But nowadays, I would not even bother kind of separating my shadow and my highlight. I would go ahead straight and paint directly onto the base layer. All right, so this basically concludes the video, and I hope that through this video you have a comprehensive understanding of what transparencies are and how to use them and why there are 2 different settings. 2 different places you can find transparencies in Photoshop. Now, for more videos on illustration methods using Photoshop and Illustrator, and also motion graphics with Adobe After Effects, please click on the subscribe button. If you would like actually to have even this illustration of the rocket and play around with it and even try this tutorial out, please contact me through my Facebook page. Yeah, I have an Instagram page. You can contact me there as well. So you can follow me on Instagram at eugenosaurus.fu. And I also have a Facebook name by the same Facebook page by the same name, eugenosaurus.fu. And both links are in the description below. All right, I'll see you all again soon. Do check out the basics of brushes video, or go ahead, dive into digital painting with another video on painting with photographic references.